The Gulf Injustice Podcast, the official podcast of Detained in Dubai with Radha Stirling.
Welcome to the Gulf Injustice Podcast. I'm Radha Stirling. Now today in news we have a British woman who has been held in Dubai on the basis of a rude WhatsApp message sent to her former Ukrainian flatmate with whom she was living during some lockdown pressure. There were arguments about whether the dining table could be used as a place of work. The woman didn't have enough room in her bedroom, and of course tensions are high. But several months on, the woman from England had decided to return home. She was starting a new job, and when she arrived at the airport, she was told that she couldn't leave, that there was a travel ban listed against her. She had no idea what that could possibly be for. She'd never been in trouble in her life, and particularly not in Dubai, where she'd been living for the past couple of years. But she was bumped around from police station to police station before finally being told that she had been that a complaint had been made against her for this swear word that she'd sent in a private WhatsApp conversation. She made a statement admitting that she had made the WhatsApp message. So she thought, okay, maybe I'll get a fine. But alas, the police confiscated her telephone and said they were sending it off to forensics for examination. This process alone has been known to take days, weeks, and even months to return that phone, and nothing's going to happen until that evidence procedure is complete. So that leaves her stuck in Dubai, even just awaiting that evidence procedure. And keep in mind, she has already admitted the cybercrime violation under UAE laws. It's illegal to say anything on WhatsApp that could be offensive or rude, even if that message is private, even if it's to a husband, wife, colleague, long-term friend. And this can really come back to bite you. What's worse is that you could have said that from outside of the UAE. The UAE has extraterritorial cybercrime laws, so anything that someone says from outside of the country can actually be prosecuted in the UAE. And we saw this with the case of Lala Sharavesh, British national, who had said a derogatory term, horseface, on a Facebook post years before she even travelled to Dubai, and yet she was arrested there and prosecuted. So this is the kind of the law that really criminalises anyone who visits the UAE. I don't think there would be anyone who hasn't violated this cybercrime law and could be liable to prosecution. So her phone's gone off to evidence. That could take 2 weeks, it could take 2 months, we don't know. The police have not been helpful in that respect and have not given her any timelines. But in fact, they have asked her to come down to the police station today, and they hope to try to resolve the matter with the Ukrainian complainant. Now, she's refused, she's been asked, and she's refused to cancel the complaint. And so it would automatically go to prosecution at that point. The police may put pressure on the two to come to some sort of solution. And often these cases are resolved out of court by compensation. And that in itself is a problem, because what we see are people taking these frivolous cases for, rude gestures in traffic, or a rude word on WhatsApp or Facebook or something like this, hoping that they're going to get compensation. And they take the complaint with that in mind and can in fact profit from it. Now, quite concerningly, and this is freaking the woman out, is that the police have told her that she faces a 500,000 dirham fine. Now, that's almost 100,000 pounds, and they've said that she faces prison time as well. Now, this is very serious, and the UAE cybercrime laws do actually provide for that serious penalty, which is completely unacceptable, that anyone who makes a rude comment on a public forum or on Twitter or anything like that can actually be prosecuted in the UAE, sentenced to imprisonment and fined up to 100,000 pounds. Can you imagine the sort of power that gives private citizens who can take vindictive and spiteful actions through the police for the purpose of punishing another person whom they don't like, or perhaps they just want to get that compensation? So when someone's confronted with a 100,000 dirham fine, that can encourage them to make an offer of settlement to the complaining party of perhaps £10,000 or something very high that is just completely unjust and uncalled for, and really encourages the abuse of law. So today we're going to find out what's happened at the police. I've contacted the FCO. Now the FCO has disappointingly said that they will try to help speed things on, but they don't really have much influence in the UAE, and that is completely false. The UK has maintained strong relations with the UAE for decades. They're one of the UAE's strongest allies. The UAE invests heavily in the UK. We have reciprocal trade agreements, security agreements, and legal enforcement agreements. So they actually have more power than a lot of other countries, but we see countries like Malaysia dispatching their foreign minister to the UAE to go and negotiate the release of someone who's been unfairly detained there, and that's Malaysia. We have the US intervening in another case that I'm dealing with, and I have Canada intervening in a case that I'm dealing with as well. So why does the UK take this attitude that we can't get involved, that we don't have any power or influence? That is utter rubbish. The UK has more power than many other embassies, many other countries. We even see Nigeria getting involved and securing the release of people who have been unjustly detained. Now, this case in particular is clearly a ridiculous abuse of the UAE's poorly drafted cybercrime laws, and the British Embassy would do well to intervene and encourage the UAE to stop prosecuting foreign nationals under these laws. I don't know why they enacted them in 2015 with such vagueness that it needs to be clarified by their local media. That's not how you clarify laws. They're trying to use, publications in the National to actually interpret the legislation that they've drafted. But in the legislation, it quite clearly says that people can be prosecuted, sentenced to imprisonment, sentenced to 500,000 dirham fines for just a little slip on social media, really, or a private WhatsApp message. Maybe the husband and wife are having an argument. I've seen it all before. And this, as I say, it's not the first time. Most cases go unreported. So we've been able to resolve a lot of these cybercrime cases by negotiating and agreeing between the parties privately. But cases like Lala Sharavish, like Scott Richards, other British nationals who have fallen foul of these UAE cybercrime laws should have been enough for the UAE to say, these laws are not working, we need to redraft them. What were we thinking? We didn't envisage that they were potentially going to be used in this matter, but every citizen holds a jail card over visitors in the UAE. And for example, if someone is spiteful, they could go and hunt your social media, your Facebook posts, your Twitter posts, and find something that you've said that could be considered offensive or rude under the UAE cybercrime, and it doesn't even have to be directed at that person. And they can take out a complaint at the police, and the police will prosecute that. So that is how ridiculous these laws are, and how the people who drafted them really didn't envisage how they could be abused. And this certainly needs review. The UAE is talking about attracting more tourism investment, and they're talking about upgrades that they've made to the legal system, some legislative changes that make it safer for tourists. But this, by far, is the biggest risk to tourists, expats and investors in the UAE. It's just so easy for someone to be prosecuted under these laws, and the result, again, is up to 2 years imprisonment for this. Up to £100,000 in fines and deportation, and of course a ban that that person could not return to the UAE. So this clearly needs to be reviewed. Now, I've been in touch with this woman. She's extremely devastated, really. She was returning home to stay with her family, starting a new job, and all of that has been put to the side. Now, even if she only got off with a small fine at the end of it, the legal system takes a long time to prosecute. So we could be talking weeks to get this forensic analysis back from the phone, and perhaps during that time they'll be looking for other violations that they could prosecute. So she could actually end up being prosecuted for additional crimes that they find while searching her phone. But in a best case scenario, even if they gave her a 5,000 dirham fine or a small fine, she could be stuck going through this foreign legal system for the next 3 to 4 months, perhaps longer with COVID. And this is what we saw with Lala Sharavish, that her case would have gone on for at least several months, if not years, had it not been for intervention. And having the media spotlight really highlight the injustice of this case, and UAE authorities intervening. And the British FCO absolutely needs to intervene in this case. This cannot go on. How can we allow this country to market to tourists and expats to come and live here if they're not providing a safe environment, if almost anyone who visits the country is a criminal technically under the law and could be prosecuted at any time. It's the luck of the draw whether they are prosecuted or not. Or perhaps someone has an issue with them and vindictively opens that police case. It's happened time and time again, and we've seen hundreds of cases under these UAE cybercrime laws. They are real. It seems like perhaps there's more to the story, or maybe it couldn't possibly be that someone's being prosecuted under these laws for something so ridiculous. But it does happen, and it happens time and time again. The UAE's own media has reported several cases of similar situations to this. So it's not something that is unbelievable. It happens all the time. It's being reported time and time again. Why is the UAE not addressing the cybercrime laws? So this woman is absolutely distraught. She's been back and forth at the police station trying to get answers. She's been crying to them, and they certainly haven't been consoling her. They've been, in fact, letting her know the maximum penalty that she faces, perhaps encouraging her to make extortionate high offers to the complainant to resolve the matter. But this is not the way to resolve matters like this. The UAE prosecution has bigger issues to deal with than a private WhatsApp message sent to a flatmate. But I have contacted the UAE's ambassador to the UK, informed him of the situation, and I'm in touch with the FCO. They've been unhelpful so far. But what I see is also the Israeli embassy has helped other citizens in similar situations to this very recently. They've been an enemy of the UAE for a long time, yet they were able to resolve this matter on behalf of their citizen, and this is what we expect from foreign embassies. When people are unjustly prosecuted or prosecuted for minor incidences that cause a huge upheaval to their lives, I expect the British Embassy to step up for their citizens. This is just an unacceptable situation that can't go on, and the British Embassy also needs to issue warnings to citizens. Their current travel warnings are simply not sufficient. A lot of people still don't know about these petty laws. They simply wouldn't expect that a flatmate or a husband or former friend could possibly hold this jail card over them. The UAE authorities would do well to inform travellers to the country when they're in flight, even handing out a pamphlet of the kind of things that could get them into trouble. Not that this would protect or prevent them from prosecution, they will still happen, but at least they have the information and it's being provided to them, and they can decide, do they really want to go to this country where I'm already a criminal before I arrive? And if the UAE is concerned and they don't want to highlight that fact to tourists or expats, then they need to review their legislation. So she has been crying, she's been distraught all week, she doesn't know how long she's going to be stuck in the UAE. All of her belongings have been shipped back to the UK. She was due to start a job, which she can't, and if she is dragged through this legal system, it could end up costing her tens of thousands of pounds in legal fees and accommodation and all of the other associated costs, and she could lose her employment. Her life can literally be turned upside down. This is not an acceptable situation, but we are hoping that perhaps with some diplomatic intervention from the UK government and the UAE authorities, that this matter can be resolved and the UAE can look forward to changing these laws that criminalise every visitor to the country. Thanks for listening to the Gulf Injustice podcast. I'm Radha Stirling.
Thank you for listening to the Gulf Injustice podcast.